But some people are under crunch time, so maybe you have to do everything in 2 days, you know.
They're sitting up there saying, what can you bring me? What can you communicate to me up here that's going to be good?
You know, I know when I was learning music in high school, I was the slowest by far. I was frustrated, I would get upset. Because you're talking about a sound surface that has no room for error.
We've all heard the phrase, you're your own best teacher, but not at first. You have to be taught by some teachers to show you how that works.
Yeah, you have to touch a few hot stoves.
Talking about individual rehearsals, you had mentioned making sure a rehearsal crescendos to the end. What did you mean by that?
I think there's a certain part of your planning that has to go into it so that you're not hitting the ground running with a lot of energy and the rehearsal dies off by the end. That maybe you can probably plan your rehearsal a little bit in a way to where you've got music in the morning, you got visual in the afternoon, and then you could put both those things together in the evening, and then typically that will allow a culmination of events to aspire, and then you can have your ending of the day where everybody felt like you were able to put 2 + 2 together and get 4.
Sure. If you just got new music passed out for the whole ensemble, how does that work? Maybe this is someone who just has a Tuesday night rehearsal and everybody just got new music. How do you make that rehearsal feel good?
I like to give the members, especially if we just handed out the music, I like to give the members 30 minutes, maybe even an hour of hack time on their own, supervised, so you can walk around and help individuals get through certain parts. Then you can come together maybe in the second hour as a battery ensemble, then the third hour with the full ensemble together. And that way you're constantly leveling up your experience, your information that you're getting. And then by the end, you can leave rehearsal and like, hey, we put all this stuff together with everybody in the room, and you're able to kind of go step by step in the learning process.
For groups who rehearse a few nights per week as opposed to the nice long weekends, which kind of lend themselves to a more cohesive rehearsal experience. But for the groups that just kind of have one night, another night, that kind of thing, what are some tips to make sure that each week builds?
Right. I think, especially when you're looking over a macro time in your schedule, like maybe come up with a 2-week plan that one Tuesday you're just doing fundamentals. Maybe on Thursday you're going to hit letter A to E in the music, and the next week you can put all that together with full ensemble, and then maybe Thursday of the second week you're doing visual to it and adding choreo and that kind of thing. But you can look at a natural arc over 2 or 3 weeks or even a month of what your goals are, and then basically add those skills on. But in my opinion, you want to develop a strong fundamental in one thing first before you start stacking on other skill sets and responsibilities.
So you don't need to do everything on Tuesday night when you've got Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and next week Tuesday,
Correct.
Thursday, Saturday.
Yeah. But some people are under crunch time, so maybe you have to do everything in 2 days. So I think that has to do with your planning process and how you want to, be successful or not. And you can make your determination of how you want to set your schedule based off of how much time you have left to perform in front of people. Divide and conquer, really. But that's the whole thing. It's like if somebody serves a whole pizza to you, you're not going to eat the whole thing in one sitting. You might actually eat 2 pieces tonight, 2 pieces tomorrow for breakfast. One slice at a time, for sure. I think that applies to everything. Learning music, learning drill, learning choreo. Because I think a lot of people look at the amount of work you have to do over a season and then think how much time they don't have. When in actuality, you do have a lot more time if you can actually slice up that goal and then really make sure that the fundamentals are in place every step of the way. And that way, you don't learn 5 things at a 30 to 70% capacity, and there's a lot of questions by the time you put on the 5th layer of something, whether you're adding choreo now as a last layer, and the students may not have the fundamentals of playing clean down first, and now you're just making it twice as bad. So I think it's really important to really lay the fundamentals out before you stack on another skill set responsibility.
Sure. How do you start getting students to understand accountability for, building to where they're going to come into rehearsal more prepared by the time, they've been in band for a while. But everyone doesn't start there, so you have to kind of learn that. And you may have learned that in your middle school program, but you may not have. So when you get freshmen coming in, et cetera, what's, in the first month, what can you do to help your freshmen start doing accountability right?
I do things a little differently than some people as far as expectations in rehearsal. I try to not have them, or I don't expect them to know what we passed out prior. Even if we pass it out a week before, I don't expect them to come in and be able to play it. After we learn those 20 bars in rehearsal, 20 or 40 clicks down, then I expect them to maintain what we learn and then make that better once they understand the fundamentals of timing, technique, and all that, because you don't want them to learn a lot that's unsupervised and then you're having to break bad habits when they get in there.
Sure.
Right? So especially with younger players, you want to make sure that you're focusing on the right things and you can pace out what they're learning. And you can also judge the player by how quick they're learning, by how they work in a group setting. Maybe they work better off one-on-one, that type of thing. So you can kind of read that a little bit better as they're learning the music. I know when I was learning music in high school, I was the slowest by far. I was frustrated. I would get upset. The drummer instructor would be like, "It's okay. I know the other 4 snares are seniors and you're a junior, but you'll get it." And I did, but I was not the player in high school that was like showing everybody else. I was the one that was like, "Help,"
Sure.
kind of thing. But yeah, I think it really has to do with spending the right amount of time and then not expecting them to come in knowing something that they can't do, right? So I think it's really important. And then, but after you learn it, you shouldn't expect to have to teach it again and again and
Right.
again. And I think that's where the expectation comes from the performer, is like once they've learned it and they've got a better grasp, then I think that's where the accountability comes in.
We've all heard the phrase, you're your own best teacher, but not at first. You have to be taught by some teachers to show you how that works.
Yeah, you have to touch a few hot stoves, and then you'll know, hey, I shouldn't be doing this because that's going to cause that roll to be dirty. I'm overplaying my 8 on a hand, but I got to know that I'm overplaying it because I have to physically hear it. So it has to be pointed out to me first. Like maybe I didn't know I was overplaying or underplaying. So I think those type things are where the accountability starts to happen, is after they're fully trained. But you can't expect them to know such a niche thing that we do, and especially the high level of expectation that's needed in the end, because you're talking about a sound surface that has no room for error on things. So like it's definitely a slow process.
Right. I think getting those building blocks and a shared vocabulary and shared goals that everyone understands is really important before you can say, hey, go achieve that goal. They have to know what that goal is and kind of even means. So, for you to go around and play on some of your students' drums with them and play clean and, be able to say, this is what clean is, or to have 2 students play together and in front of the whole group talk about the balance, success or lack of success and what they need to do, just to develop, that understanding of what clean is, what balance is. Otherwise, if you're going to be in rehearsal talking about, play with better balance, or, make sure we're driving the beat, or, any phrase like that, it's not going to have any meaning unless in rehearsal you've actually kind of explained it and pointed to some examples of it. And I really like music listening and watching other marching shows, but even non-marching music, even non-band music, to talk about some of those concepts. But once everyone understands, then you can refer to it.
Correct. There has definitely been a handful of times in the past year as I've let other people come into the organizations that we're teaching, and they might bring in a new terminology that they've learned somewhere else. But the kids that have already developed a culture of one certain terminology may not understand that, even though people are throwing out common words, maybe in the drum corps, higher level or higher tier type of comments. The students, they're just yes manning it because they just don't want you talking to them anymore, but they may not fully understand what certain things mean, or hand gestures or whatever. But so I think there's a certain level of laying out the verbiage key in the beginning and explanation of things. And one thing I like to do is we'll put up on the board, we'll put all the terms that we're going to use and what it means. And one thing that I like to do in the beginning is we'll do the keep it simple, stupid method, right? The KISS method, which is you're too loud, you're too soft, you're too fast, you're too slow. And if you start with those 4 things as just a basic fundamental comment before you start getting into the higher tiered explanations of things, those four things can typically be a critique and a fix in the same sentence, so because I'm a big stickler to, you just can't critique, you got to give a solution on the back end of that, because otherwise you're just telling somebody what they did wrong,
right?
And you're not able to help them move forward.
And they'll just nod. And,
yeah, sure, I crushed the roll, but why? Oh, well, you're probably pinching your fulcrum too much, or you weren't using arm. There's something in there. Depending on whatever tempo you're playing at, that could be the reason. You just have to make sure you're able to kind of analyze it and then apply the answer to it.
Right. I know one of the things that we try to offer as a company is full show packages that give you everything together, pre-designed, a cohesive package. But whether you did that through us with a full show package, just could you speak to why it's great to come out prepared and having everything looking good and, at a certain level from the beginning as best as possible?
Sure. I think for the groups that are just starting out, especially that don't necessarily have a iconic name that goes with them that could help them when they're performing for the first time in a season, looks matter, right? We all judge with our eyes first, right? So if you come in and you're prepared and you've got your uniform and your floor and everything looks correct and feels good, you're already setting a tone for what the audience is expecting. And you may come out, you may not play at 100%, but you're already going to be at a different tier of expectation versus if you come in t-shirt and jeans and you weren't playing well, then it's just the level of expectation of what the program is definitely a little bit different. So even if you are just figuring out how to play well and getting your ensemble off the ground, maybe you just learn how to fan fold the floor the night before, whatever you are in your growth of your program, it's really important that when you come through those doors in a gym that you look the part before you even start playing a drum.
Yeah, we hear with our eyes. That's from what we're wearing to how the equipment looks, if it looks well maintained or if it's, creaking out there and barely getting on the floor.
But that's human nature, though. That's not an indoor percussion thing. That's if anybody walked through the door, whether they're wearing overalls or a suit, you're going to have that perception of them before they open their mouth. Now, the moment somebody opens their mouth or play a drum or their keyboard, that perception can change, but the initial reaction of what you see is pretty elemental in human nature.
It's communication.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
Yep. For sure. I do like overalls, by the way, so I'm not knocking that.
Clean overalls.
But if I was wearing overalls and you're wearing a suit, they're going to listen to you first, right? Naturally.
Right. So. My Down on the Farm show requires them. So,
sure, exactly.
We're going to look the part. Sharp.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Now, this one's just for the percussionists, but what do you think about playing with bad sticks or bad mallets? How does that affect your growth as a student? What can you do as a program to set the students up?
I think getting your implements from a consistent place helps, because then there's some accountability that you will learn that there is no accountability in the stick selection or mallet selection. So I think that's the first. You want to find a place that you feel comfortable getting the same sticks every time, that kind of thing. Now, as a player, we've all been to drum shops, and you've got students that will wheel out 100 sticks, and they're kink, kink, kunk, kunk, kink, kink, kunk, kunk. And typically those pairs are already matched when they're in there. And the moment you pull them out of the cardboard slot that's holding everything together, you're taking away all the work that the machines and humans did prior before it got to you. So I would trust the pairs of sticks that you get first. Now, you may pick a pair versus another pair, but I would never pull them all out and start matching your own. Now, that used to be old school. Technology is way different now, so things are a lot easier to get that's more consistent. But typically for sticks, you want higher pitch sticks, which ends up meaning they're going to be heavier sticks in the end. When sticks feel a little hollow, they got a little lower pitch to them. Sometimes students don't really know what a good pair and bad pair is until they're broken. And then they're like, well, these are bad, right? But as long as they're not broken, they're always a good pair because you spent $12 on them, $15, right? But I think the moment you get a really good pair and they bounce really well and plays at 3 inches really well and it sounds crisp, then you start to hear the expectation of what you want, because now you know, hey, these actually things feel good in my hands. Not only do they sound good.
Right. And I think for a whole percussion section at any level, it needs to be part of the training to take care of what you have, because it is expensive. And a lot of students don't have to buy their own mallets. It's part of the school budget. But you can't just be burning through mallets and leaving them all over the band room and not taking care of them. You know, they have to be put away right so that they last longer. And then for snare drummers and tenor drummers in particular in the marching, you know, if they are going to be responsible for their own sticks or not, you have to train them. If you play a good rim shot that does not have all too much rim in it and it's not breaking the stick over the rim but is resonant and you get all the nice overtones out of it, then your sticks are going to last longer and we won't have to pay for them so often. And playing with broken sticks is just a drag for anybody. You know, the rhythms get worse, the sounds get worse.
Sure, and one thing to think about is the amount of times I've seen sticks that look like a beaver got a hold of it and the tape's all chewed up. Well, clearly you've got extra material hanging off of your stick when you're trying to play. So the feel is going to be way different. So it's better to retape your sticks every week. Even though they're not broken, you don't need to retape them every time you get a new pair of sticks. It's okay to retape them every couple weeks if they start to get chewed up, because then you'll preserve the stick even longer too, because now you're not going to have naked wood beating on the shot, right, on the rim. So,
and that's another thing you can see when a group walks out, what their drumsticks look like.
Exactly.
Have some pride.
Yeah, are they taking care of their implements? Are they doing the right thing or not? And it all matters.
It all matters, right. When music first gets passed out, I think it's easy to really focus on, did everyone learn the notes? And how proficient are my students getting at learning their notes? Are they taking care of their end of the bargain so everyone knows the notes? But then at a certain point, you really need to be listening from the audience perspective and trying to discern, you know, is the music coming across? So what are some ways to make sure that the music is coming across?
Yeah, I think one of the most common mistakes for people that either write their own music or they're playing something that another arranger has given them and they're listening to that audio recording over and over and over again. I think the biggest mistake people make is they're hearing what it's supposed to be versus what it is. And when things are really thick in the ensemble, your mind automatically goes to, oh, I can hear that melody. Well, no, you can't, because you really can't hear it, but you're physically trying to hear it because you heard it in the recording and you can see the vibe player's hands moving. So clearly it's making noise. But in reality, you've got to be able to break that stuff down. If it's super thick, then you start with just the battery first, if they're the main focus, and then you can add maybe the marimba ostinato or line, and then maybe the melody, or vice versa. Maybe you only need the melody with the battery, and then you add in the electronics afterwards. And basically, it's a good teaching technique and ensemble to find out what's sticking out, and most importantly, what's important in the musical production. Because the arrangers don't get it right all the time, right? So if you want to build meaning for each ensemble, because every ensemble is going to be different.
Sure.
So when you're hearing it as an educator, you want to be able to kind of shape and mold that piece of clay based off of your own performers. And I do think the best way to do that is addition by subtraction. You just subtract everything else and then start adding in what is important enough to make it feel full without distracting from the focus. And then you just leave out what's not needed. Just because there's 3 other lines or players playing, they don't need to play. If they do, then let's put them on something that's already being played without adding another line that gets into the mix of things.
So it's okay to omit things from your score or make decisions about what lines need to be brought into focus.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sure.
And I think, just because it's written doesn't mean it's law all the time. That was one thing I learned a long time ago, is like, just erase it. Just pretend like it never even existed. And that's a hard thing to do with performers. If they spent 2 weeks practicing this part, and now all of a sudden they've almost got it, and you're an ensemble, and they're still struggling, and you realize as the designer or educator there running ensemble, that part is not needed because everything else is really clear and good, then you have to weigh the performer's time of, how much time they spent trying to practice to make it great. But there's always that emotional connection with your practice time that you spent to put in this part. But in actuality, it may not be important because it lasted 5 seconds, and you can put them on a suspended cymbal roll or something else to keep them active that doesn't necessarily get into the way of the overall musical production. So,
now, when you talk about a really large structure with a lot of moving parts, like a marching band score, That's a lot of lines of music, a lot of instruments playing at the same time, maybe. How can you make sure that something with so many moving parts comes across, and that, the most important thing gets to be the most important thing?
I think a lot of that is dictated by visual after the music's written. So if you've got a good visual designer, they will make sure that all the musical elements are focused where they need to be. But sometimes that's not always possible due to the placement, especially on a football field. You got to be a little more malleable because there's a lot of counts to get from A to B sometimes to get people focused. And sometimes those little 2-bar trade-offs in the battery don't make any sense because you need more than 8 counts to be focused, right? So there's that type of thing where you want to make sure that you're arranging for those longer focus moments, and then the visual designer will have a better opportunity of placing those in the right places. But if they happen to not do that, then it's another one of those things where you might want to adjust the music based off of the visual focus. Because again, one of those things that we see it, then it's going to be clear to us, to our ear. If we can't see it and we're hearing something, then there's definitely a disconnect. So I think that's part of the coordination that people have to do and attempt when they get their product is making sure that they're seeing and hearing everything that's obvious.
Going through the score and highlighting what is important. You know what I mean? If you're looking at a whole marching band score and there is these instruments are on a melody, it seems like, well, maybe we need to, for these 8 bars, identify that that's going to be an important thing that needs to be voice number 1. Our human ears can only take in so much at the same time. So combing through your score and getting those focuses named, just even as a staff and the people who are going to be cleaning the show, say it out loud. Let's identify it together and we're all on the same page. And that way, if you're working with the people who are voice number 2 or voice number 3, that understanding is there. And you don't come in from subsectionals wild with energy, to put voice number 3 as the loudest one, right?
Right. And I think it's a common problem with the not clear communication of the focuses. So when you do go into sectionals, people are treating their part like it's the main theme. So you get into ensemble, then you have all these ideas that are conflicting for focus, versus if everybody knew what they were working on, then they would probably get the right dynamics right and things like that in their subsectionals. And most importantly, if you're the arranger that's coming in after the fact that you've written something and you can physically see it, then things start to make a little more sense about what you can change and mold and correct so that it fits the program right. I mean, when you're ordering custom shows or even a catalog show, there is some manipulation that needs to be done on the ground level. It's never a plug and play scenario. You've got to be able to understand your kid's playing ability. You got to be able to understand the drill writer's ability to put people in focus and things like that. And if it's not, then you just got to go back and readjust some things. It's not a big deal. And I think that's another mistake people make, is to think that they can't change anything. And ultimately, it's all changeable. There's nothing set in stone. So.
It's art, right? It's not medicine. This isn't like your doctor's prescription and you're like, oh, I won't follow the instructions.
Right.
It's art.
Right. And some of the biggest problems that I've seen is because somebody spent a rehearsal or 2 on it, they don't want to change it, even though they got 20 more rehearsals to the end of the season. That's a big red flag, because now you're going to be dealing with a problem for 20 more rehearsals versus just cutting your losses on those 2 rehearsals and making it right and moving on. So I think that's something that a lot of people need to digest and just own. It's an easy thing to do, is to just get caught up in your own program and your own time of value that you spend on something and you don't want to get rid of it. But in actuality, I mean, you'll get that time back, and most importantly, once it's correct, then that value becomes even more when you got those 20 extra rehearsals left, because you're doing the right thing now. You're reinforcing the right habits versus spending 20 rehearsals reinforcing bad thing.
Right.
Nobody wants that.
The audience won't miss it either.
No, they won't.
If it's gone,
they
the
don't
audience
even know that you spent those 2 days on it.
That's right.
They don't know. They don't. Nor do they care.
Right. So. They're sitting up there saying, "What can you bring me? What can you communicate to me up here that's going to be good? Take me on the ride." That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I do know that younger groups need more time and more reps, so it is good to come out with your whole show on and then go back, and that way they're always repping the closer, they're ready to go, so when you go in there and you do make a change because something doesn't work visually, that their hands are prepared to make those changes and they're not still fumbling through something they just learned.